Welcome to Story Planet, where every tale is a journey into calm and quiet discovery. Tonight, join us in the peaceful village of Evening Bay, where a lighthouse keeper uncovers gentle mysteries of the sea. Get cozy, relax, and let the soft glow of the lighthouse guide you through the soothing story of the lighthouse at Evening Bay. The journey begins now. The Lighthouse at Evening Bay. The small coastal town of Evening Bay had always been a quiet place, known for its gentle harbor and quaint shops lining cobblestone streets. The rhythm of life there was unhurried, guided by the rise and fall of the tides. It was exactly what Elliot Mason was looking for. After spending nearly 40 years sailing the seas, he was ready for a change. The endless horizon that once called to him now felt distant and lonely. He craved peace, a place where the world seemed smaller, simpler, and quieter. Elliot had accepted a job as the keeper of the town's old lighthouse. Though it hadn't been used in years, the townsfolk had kept it in good condition, considering it a historic landmark. Perched on the cliffs that overlooked the ocean, the lighthouse stood tall and solitary, a symbol of a bygone era. On the day of his arrival, Elliot walked through the narrow streets of Evening Bay, pulling his old, weathered suitcase behind him. The sound of the waves lapping against the shore was a soothing backdrop as he made his way to the general store owned by Marion, a woman who had lived in the town her whole life. She greeted him with a warm smile and a soft voice that matched the town's gentle charm. "Welcome, Elliot," Marion said as she handed him the keys to the lighthouse. "It's been a while since anyone lived up there. I hope you'll find it peaceful." "I'm sure I will," Elliot replied, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders as he held the cold metal keys in his hand. Marion added, "If you need anything, don't hesitate to come by. The lighthouse may be old, but it still has a bit of magic left in it." Elliot smiled politely, not quite understanding what she meant by magic, but the warmth of her words comforted him nonetheless. He thanked her, then made his way up the hill to the lighthouse. As the lighthouse came into view, its grandeur struck him. Standing tall against the backdrop of the ocean, it was a sturdy structure, its white stone walls weathered but proud. The large lantern room at the top was enclosed in glass, with a metal railing circling it like a crown. The cliffs below were steep, dropping straight down into the crashing waves. Elliot unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of salt and dust, but it was warmer than he expected. The living quarters, though small, were cozy. Just a bed, a small table, and a few shelves. He climbed the spiral staircase up to the lantern room, where he could see the entire expanse of the ocean stretching out before him. The wind whispered softly through the cracks in the walls, and for the first time in years, Elliot felt at home. That first night, as Elliot lay in bed, the sound of the ocean lulled him toward sleep. But just as he was drifting off, something caught his attention. It was faint at first, barely audible, but there was no mistaking it, a soft melody carried on the wind. The tune was gentle, almost like a lullaby, and it seemed to come from the sea itself. He sat up, listening carefully. The sound grew clearer, but it was unlike anything he had ever heard before. Intrigued, Elliot pulled on his jacket and stepped outside into the cool night air. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver light over the ocean. He looked out over the water, but there was nothing, just the steady rise and fall of the waves. The melody continued, floating on the wind, and a strange sense of calm washed over him. He stood there for what felt like hours, listening, trying to make sense of the music. Finally, when it seemed to fade, Elliot returned inside, his thoughts racing. Could it have been his imagination? Or was there something more to the sound? The next morning, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that the melody meant something. As he explored the lighthouse, he came across an old leather-bound journal tucked away on one of the shelves. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing inside was still legible. The journal belonged to Thomas Greaves, a lighthouse keeper from nearly a century ago. As Elliot flipped through the pages, one entry caught his eye. It described strange occurrences, the sound of music on the wind, lights in the distance, and the appearance of a ship during storms. Greaves had written about these events with a mixture of wonder and fear, unsure of whether they were real or a figment of his imagination. The final entry was the most cryptic. The ship appeared again tonight. I feel it is trying to find its way home. Tomorrow I will light the way, just as the lighthouse was meant to. I hope it brings peace. Elliot closed the journal, his mind racing. Could it be possible that the lighthouse had played a role in guiding something more than just ships? And if so, why had it been abandoned? Curious about the journal, Elliot paid a visit to James, the town historian, who had a deep fascination with the lighthouse's past. Over coffee at the town's cafe, Elliot shared what he had found. James nodded thoughtfully, his eyes lighting up with interest. That journal must be from the time of the Morning Star, he said. The Morning Star? Elliot asked. It was a ship that was lost at sea about 100 years ago, James explained. Legend has it that the ship was caught in a terrible storm while heading toward Evening Bay. The lighthouse keeper at the time, Thomas Greaves, saw the ship's lights before it disappeared into the storm. Some say the spirits of the sailors still roam the waters, trying to find their way back. And the music you heard, well, some believe that's the crew calling out, hoping someone will light the way home. Elliot listened, intrigued, but still skeptical. You really think that's true? James shrugged. Who's to say? This town has its fair share of mysteries, and the sea, it holds more secrets than we'll ever know. But one thing's certain, The lighthouse has always had a special connection to the ocean, and it hasn't shown its light in a long time. Elliot left the cafe that afternoon with a sense of unease. He couldn't explain the melody he had heard, and the story of the morning star weighed heavily on his mind. Could the lighthouse truly be connected to something beyond the physical world? Days passed, and life at the lighthouse became routine. Elliot would climb to the top each morning to take in the view, enjoying the quiet solitude. But the memory of the music lingered, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was drawing him toward the ocean. Then, one evening, a storm rolled in. The sky darkened, and the wind picked up, howling through the cliffs. Elliot watched from the lantern room as the waves crashed violently against the rocks below. The storm reminded him of his days at sea, and he felt a familiar thrill in the power of nature. As the night grew darker, the music returned. This time it was louder, clearer, as though the wind itself was singing. Elliot's heart raced as he stepped outside, the rain stinging his face. He looked out over the water, and there, through the rain and fog, he saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance. The melody grew louder, more haunting, and Elliot stood frozen, watching as the lights moved closer, only to disappear moments later. The storm raged on, but the music remained, swirling around him like a dream. When the lights vanished, Elliot returned to the lantern room, drenched but determined. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, Elliot met with James and Marion, explaining his plan to relight the lantern. The lighthouse had been dark for too long, and if there was any chance that it could guide the lost ship home, he was willing to try. Together, they cleaned the old machinery, polishing the glass and making sure everything was in working order. As the sun began to set, Elliot climbed to the top of the lighthouse and, with trembling hands, lit the lantern. The golden beam cut through the night, casting its glow far across the ocean. For the first time in years, the lighthouse was alive again. Elliot stood at the top, watching as the light shone over the water. The wind was calm now, but the music returned, softer this time, almost like a farewell. And then, in the distance, he saw them, lights small and flickering, like those of the morning star. The ship's lights moved slowly toward the shore, and Elliot felt a sense of peace wash over him. The melody, once haunting, now sounded like a song of release, as though the spirits of the crew were finally finding their way home. The lights flickered once more, then disappeared, leaving only the sound of the gentle waves and the soft glow of the lighthouse. A new beginning. In the days that followed, the story of the relighting spread through Evening Bay. The townspeople thanked Elliot for bringing the lighthouse back to life, and the legend of the morning star took on a new meaning. Elliot, now settled into his role as lighthouse keeper, felt at peace. The sea, which had once been a place of adventure and danger, now felt like home. He tended to the lighthouse with care, knowing that, whether in the past or present, it stood as a beacon of hope for those lost at sea. And as the seasons changed, the melodies on the wind grew softer, until one day they disappeared altogether. Elliot knew then that the spirits of the morning star had finally found their rest. The lighthouse, bathed in the golden light of each sunset, remained a quiet sentinel, watching over the peaceful waters of Evening Bay. Thank you for joining us in the peaceful story of the lighthouse at Evening Bay. If you could see the beam of the lighthouse's new beginning shining bright, you may consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to keep the light of our stories glowing. We hope to have you with us for more quiet journeys and discoveries. Good night and sweet dreams.